closely with site selection GAAMPs because as you get larger, that's a large part of that odor level. So if you're storing the manure, let's say in a stockpile, they gather manure out of the barn, mix it with their hay or bedding, and they decide to let it stockpile up on the side on the farmstead. They can do that uncovered for up to 6 months, a year if covered. They can never use the same location if it isn't impervious for at least another 3 years. And then in between it requires to be utilized in crop production, trying to mitigate the nuisance of nutrient runoff, nutrient leaching. The site selection GAAMPs, everybody's favorite, identifies the placement of where livestock can reside on the landscape. The site selection GAAMPs is going to be based on what we call animal units. An animal unit is 1,000 pounds of live animal weight. Everything under 50 animal units, yes, 50,000 pounds of live animal weight, is going to be considered a small operation. We'll get into that more at the next slide. Everything over 50 animal units is what we call our production facilities, our large livestock facilities. Once you reach to that, then we're going to start looking at different setbacks from property lines. Starts at 250 feet, goes all the way up to 600, depending on the number of animal units. We're going to be looking at an odor management plan. Now, granted, odor management plans are really something a part of almost every livestock operation because of its manure, but an odor management plan from the facilities itself. That's when we talked earlier about an odor plume. And, you know, really the other part of that with odor management that we got to think about, that we're thinking a lot more about, is mortality management as well. And you're seeing new language in the GAAMPs this last year, largely in response to the last couple of years that we've had.
I'm sorry, mortality?
Mortality, correct, of livestock. Thank you. All right, so primarily residential, your backyard chickens, your small operations. The site selection GAAMPs state that if you're category 3, if you're not primarily residential, you may have livestock of 350 animal units. Category 4 in there states that you may not have livestock of any number if it is in fact primarily residential. So what is primarily residential? It's the definition in the site selection GAAMP states that you cannot have any neighboring residence within 250 feet of the livestock facility, the barn, coop, an outdoor lot, where it's not dominated by desirable forage or the density is such that you have to manage the manure and runoff. Notice that doesn't include pastures. Pastures is the opposite of that, where you have a density of desirable forage, or it's populated by desirable forage, and the density is low enough to not cause degradation, where it doesn't wear it down to dirt, mud, manure that could run off from the location. Those are considered livestock facilities. Those are required to be 250 feet from your neighbor's home, and we're talking about the actual residence, the structure itself, not the property line. And that's intentional because if you live on a 20-acre property, or the neighbor lives on a 20-acre property, and he might be nowhere near it. But that's a lot different from somebody that lives on a quarter-acre property. The other aspect to be primarily residential is if you have more than 13 homes within 1/8 of a mile, that's 660 feet. If you meet either one of these conditions, you are considered primarily residential. And that means that you cannot have livestock under the site selection GAAMPs, under right to farm. Does not mean you can't have livestock. It just means you can't claim right to farm to have it. And that's where your guys' local ordinance would come in. So if your local ordinance states that you may have livestock under what conditions that the township wants, you could still have them under that condition, if they're primarily residential under site selection GAAMPs. If they're not primarily residential under site selection GAAMPs, meaning they're category 3 or allowed to have that livestock, then it would possibly preempt local ordinance language, regardless of what it may say, even if it's less restrictive. And that is just the nature of that preemption language there within the Act. So this is unfortunately a little outdated because I need to spend the time to go through Power BI and missed all those titles earlier to get that updated. But this last year we had over 200 complaints across the state. And we had over 110 proactive requests. My team consists of myself, as you guys are aware of, Jay Corson, who covers this area, and then we have Kyle McCarty up in the thumb, Erica Rogers in the west, and Steve Mahoney up in the northeast. That's my entire team. That's everybody that covers the Right to Farm program and responds to complaints and proactives and does presentations like this. Complaints typically occur wherever you have the intersection of rural agriculture and people. It doesn't surprise me at all that I'm standing here in beautiful Webster Township today. I enjoy driving through and seeing the fields and the countryside, and I also recognize where you guys are located. You are at the intersection of the outskirts of urban, rural, and that interaction. And you see that across our entire state. You know, Oakland, Genesee County there is a pretty hot spot. We get a lot of complaints. Our outskirts of northwest Grand Rapids and my hometown area of Muskegon, Ottawa, Allegan County receives quite a heavy workload. And the other one you see up there is our Greater Traverse City region, area that is quite rural, dominated by a lot of vineyards, a lot of cherries, and a lot of people from Illinois with money. So everything that I got with you here, I guess here we'll get to questions in a minute. This is our webpage. That first tile there, Right to Farm program, there you can get the Act, which I do have a copy because I'm anticipating a question or two that I want to read directly from it. Our complaints, how to file a complaint, and conformance reviews. The next tile there is the GAAMPs. That's where you can get a copy of each one of the GAAMPs that's current. We also have archived GAAMPs up there now, so you don't have to submit a FOIA for it because that's public knowledge. Why would we not have it available? So that's up there now, as well as additional resources for answering any other questions we talked earlier, like construction code, biosolids, the GAAPs, the generally accepted processing practices that discusses nuisance from noise and odors from processing facilities, and all a litany of other information. And then that last slide, that tile that I left out, is site selection. Part of the site selection process is that you receive what's called a site suitability. That opens a 30-day window where anybody within a half mile that owns land within a half mile, or any township or county within a half mile of the proposed facility, may file an appeal. So we actually have a list of producers within the last year who have gone through and received site suitability, a little hot link to some imagery of their operation, some details regarding the operation, and then some dates. And I bring that up last because that usually brings them, wait, what? How does this work? That's that. And of course, that's all available. You can look at any time. I grabbed diapers and jumper bags instead of business cards, so that is my cell phone, that is my email. Please write it down. As Shereen can tell you, I'm always happy and available to answer any questions that you have. And I guess at that point, I'll kick it back to you guys for questions.
Mr. Harms.
You going to call out people, Jen?
Go ahead.
All right. So I got a couple. When we talk about it doesn't preempt any state or federal statutes, does that include the drain code?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, they're county drain commissioners, but it's Michigan drain code that they enforce.
That would be correct.
Okay. Because that, and when you start talking about livestock down in waterways, if it's a drain, they have specific laws with regards to that.
So that actually comes under the riparian doctrine, and that's referenced in the manure management GAAMPs. And the language really stinks because it basically states that it cannot cause water quality degradation.
Yeah.
They're allowed to have access to it, but it can't cause water quality degradation. Which basically, when we go through and do that, do you have any sort of protected crossing? Do you have some sort of structure in place that allows them to have access to the water, but not wallow in it and tear it up? NRCS actually has funding, and that's one of the ways that we mentioned earlier, pointing to your other local partners and resources, that will pay for a stream crossing, where they'll actually go through and put in fencing, put down rock barrier, so that they could come up and have access to the water, but not turn it into a mud. Great question.
Next one was, when you go and you do a site review and you go through the management plan and all that other stuff, and you write somebody a letter that they've met all the criteria, what's the follow-up on that? Do you guys do yearly follow-up? Do you do any follow-up unless there's a complaint? I mean, once somebody gets a letter, is it good for there on out, or what is the time frame on it?
Absolutely, great question. No, as we stated, my resources, we have 5 people in the program. I think over the history of the program, at least as far back as our database goes, we have over 8,000 complaints that we've investigated. Furthermore, the law only requires that we go out and investigate a complaint within 7 business days. So not only do we not have the resources, I don't have the authority to do any sort of follow-up with that. It's a complaint-driven process. Now, just because they've gone through and received a letter, that doesn't mean that they're protected for perpetuity. Of course, if you change your management, that's no longer going to be valid. Or if you lied in the information that you provided, that's not going to be valid. So that's tough. That is a tough one because we get that quite a bit where it's like, oh, am I good? Like, well, did you change anything? Has the conditions changed?
A follow-up to the site plan. When you're doing a site plan and you talk about distance between a residence and the site, how do you determine what's a home or a household? Especially nowadays where you have people turning what would have been a factory or a barn or a garage into a home, and that may possibly be split off. How do you recognize that that's a house or not? Do you look at adjacent property, basically their lot plans, or do you just kind of look around and see what you can see? How do you determine that? Because there's good room for error there.
Absolutely, and it's something that we're constantly evaluating and trying to figure out how do we best utilize our resources, but how do we get the absolute best information. Quite often we require the person requesting the review, the police supply names, addresses, locations of your neighbors, and then we will, counties like Washington, where you guys have an awesome county GIS portal, we'll go on there and identify that because it's usually pretty accurate in terms of who's there, what's there, if it's a residence. The ones that always give me heartburn is if it's owned by a trust, because then you really just don't know until the third and final step is we do a drive around. We'll actually go out and identify, is this a habitable structure or is it a falling apart hunting shack? It's obviously not a residence.
Is an apartment complex one residence, or every apartment's a residence?
Yeah, we consider each individual unit.
Sorry folks, I got 2 more.
Oh, okay, Jeff, finish up.
Once somebody gets a letter, how do they lose it? You said in perpetuity, I mean.
No, I said it does not reside for perpetuity.
Oh, right, that's
Okay,
what I mean.
All right.
So is it you guys coming back out and saying they no longer meet it? Or, and this follows up with another thing, is there a list of GAAMP farms that you guys keep that you would add or take people off of to show basically that somebody is GAAMP certified or not?
Actually, your folks here could answer that. Basically, we'd ask you to file a complaint, file a request. If you have an operation that you are concerned about, or that they missupplied information to us when we were out there, file a complaint. In light of this, then we'll go out and review with that, considering that information. Because that'll happen, where they'll oh no, these ducks aren't mine. Oh. Then we go, no, they've been there for 2+ years, so we'll go out and ask them, please, provide accurate management.
And do you have a list? Or no?
We do not. And realistically, as we stated, like, as an operation changes, any determination that would have been done may no longer be valid. And as markets ebb and flow.
Right. Sorry, I got one more.
Jeff,
Keep going.
If, what happens if, and it's really not fair to the farmer or the property owner if this happens, but what happens if somebody buys a lot next door and they've got their farm all set up and that used to be the field, and now all of a sudden somebody builds within 250 feet of them?
Michigan Right to Farm Act 286-473, Section 2, or 3, number 2. The farm or farm operation shall not be found a public private nuisance if the farm or farm operation existed before a change in land use or occupancy within 1 mile of the boundaries of the farmland. Absolutely, the law addresses that itself. The part about that you didn't get to that isn't fair, the farm can't expand. So now if they wanted to bring in more animals, they have to go through siting. And if that house built right there, within 250 feet, or within the whatever setbacks may be, if they're within the odor plume, they have to sign off on it. If it's just within 250 feet, it's sorry. You can't.
So it's in the property owner that has the GAAMPs, it's in their best interest if they add property or add animals to contact you guys to change the site plan. So therefore, if somebody moved in and built next door, then that would be recorded.
I got language here on that too. No, instead of waiting up your time for me to read directly, basically, when they go through a siting application, they're expected to identify any expanded holding capacity within 3 years. So if they're going through and, let's say, submit an application today, I'm going to ask them politely, is this everything you're planning to do within the next 3 years? Because if you go through and do it again, the language in there no longer considers that expanded. That's now a new facility. And that's going to require larger setbacks, less people, and you may not be able to meet it.
Mr. Westman.
A claim under right to farm requires a commercial component. How do you demonstrate a commercial component? Who makes that determination? In other words, if I sell a dozen eggs a week, is that commercial? I don't think so. I think that's a recreational activity. I think that there should be something more. So the question is, number one, what constitutes commercial? And number two, who makes that determination?
So, sure. I apologize. All right, so 2 ways I'm going to answer this. There's my official answer and then my opinion. The official answer is MDARD does not determine if you're a commercial operation. We do not have the authority to do that. We only have the authority, again, to investigate nuisance complaints, determine conformance to the GAAMPs, and then facilitate the annual review. So we don't, so my opinion, so we don't determine if it's a commercial operation. And there's the rather famous court case, 2005, Township of Shelby versus Papish, if I may oversimplify through summarization, basically said whether you sell 1 egg a year or 1 million eggs a day, you may be commercial by nature. The way I typically get, when I get this question and I talk to producers and townships, because I get this question a lot, is there's a big difference between having a napkin agreement with your neighbor across the street that I buy a dozen eggs from you every week, and somebody that utilizes QuickBooks. Because ultimately, the other part of your question, it's up to a judge. You have to prove to a judge that you are in fact commercial by nature. And I've had a lot of talk with one of your coworkers here about this, because your guys' authority resides under the Zoning Enabling Act, which doesn't give you the authority to determine conformance to other state laws. And I don't have the authority to determine if it's a commercial operation. So then it has to fall upon a judge, because what they're trying to do is utilize right to farm as an affirmative defense. So they have to show that they're in conformance with the GAAMPs, a farm operation, and the commercial production of farm products. They have to prove that to a judge. If you meet those things, then the judge will hopefully award right to farm protection from the nuisance litigation. So, and ultimately, in a long-winded way, I can't do it. I don't think you can do it. I think it's going to fall upon a judge.
Mr. Kingsman, may I ask a question? In the same vein, so I grow hay. I sell hay, I make money. Does that give me the right to have pigs?
Yeah, I get this sort of question all the time, and I struggle with it myself because in the law, 286, 473, section 3, number